So if you all haven't been keeping up with the metagame, because I'm sure you have, and this meta's pretty garbaggio, and it's online, Buster Blader has surprisingly made a rise in popularity. How? The world may never know, except we kinda do know because the deck's actually good. So in today's video, I'm going to discuss how is Buster Blader good, a discussion on what the current metagame takes of Buster Blader are, and realistically, why you may want to consider picking up this new top tier trap strategy. Okay, it's not really new, it's just using new cards to help the deck become top tier, but anyways. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to never miss a new video coming out on my channel. So first, let's discuss the Wincon. The Wincon is essentially you flip the Buster Blader trap card. This trap card will enable you to send Buster Blader memories, or I guess it's called Destruction Sword memories, but I digress, and you send another Buster Blader monster to the graveyard in order to summon your Buster Dragon. This Buster Dragon is going to have two relevant effects. One, it's going to be able to have an effect that makes all your opponent's monsters dragons, and it's going to have another effect that on your turn, if you do not control a Buster Blader monster, you can revive one from grave. This does come up for the longevity of the strategy. Secondarily, now that you have a Buster Blader and memories in grave, presuming you have a dragon in deck, which you realistically should, that's kind of the goal of the deck, to put a dragon in grave, and then banish your memories, Buster Blader, and dragon monster in order to summon the Buster Blader fusion. Now, while this may seem somewhat weird at first, I mean, like, realistically, you're only putting the fusion in the synchro on field, why is that so good? It is actually kind of insane because now you have a skill drain lock on your opponent, while putting two massive bodies onto the field. This skill drain is quite oppressive at multiple points, and it's hard for a lot of decks to realistically out this lock. Sure, you can have a card like Droplet, Chalice, or any effect negation, but in the current metagame, not a lot of decks have a way to counter this type of negation-like effect. I mean, if Adamancipator was still in the format, then maybe they could use a card like Tackle Crusader to out the lock, but because Adamancipator is not as relevant as the other two big combo decks being Dragon Link and Infernoble, that makes Buster Blader that much better. This lock is also shockingly consistent, considering the fact that it realistically is a 1 to 2 card combo deck. I mean, it's a trap deck, but it's also a quote-unquote combo deck, because the goal is you get access to the trap card, either through the level 1 Dragon Searcher that on normal summon will add a Destruction Sword card from your deck to your hand, then you're going to have the trap card, which is at 3 copies, and then you can fetch that trap card off Trap Trick, making it 9 ways to access the trap. But then additionally, you're going to have supplementary engines like the recently released Dogmatica and Red Eyes engines that also put dragons in the grave, and I'll discuss those two engines in specific in a second, but those two synergize stupidly well with this strategy. So now we have the basic idea established. You're going to want to set up the skill drain lock and then output a ton of pressure on the next turn. Even if you don't output a ton of pressure on the next turn, it's okay because you have follow-ups like the Dogmaticas and Dragoon. Now, it's important to recognize that in this combo, it really is a one-turn lock because your Buster Dragon is going to be destroyed on the following turn no matter what. But especially in a format like this with combo being so prevalent, one turn is realistically all you need in order to assure victory. On a completely unrelated note, if you want some of the highest quality playmats in the industry, make sure to check out my friends over at Imperium Duelist. They produce not only high quality playmats, but the designs are top tier, and by using my code BladeYGO10 at checkout, you'll receive a 10% discount while supporting me at the same time. Once again, that's ImperiumDuelist.com. With that, let's resume the discussion. So getting back to Buster Blader, another important aspect about this deck is it's realistically all one card combos. Because the deck meshes so well with all of these coinciding engines, you're able to essentially establish this as a 1 to 2 card combo deck. And obviously it's better to use, like I was saying in most of my vids, it's better to use less of your cards rather than more of them. Again, there are always exceptions to this rule, most notably being a deck like Danger Thunder Dragon, probably being the deck deck that screams out in recent memory, a deck that needs multiple cards to play the game, but was definitely a top tier threat. This deck instead though establishes something really oppressive turn 1 while only using so few cards. And while you could make the argument that yes, this is a trap deck, which is like, why would I play this when I could do 1-card combos with a deck like Dragon Link or Infernoble, there actually is a good reason. One, it's a control deck, meaning you don't lose nearly as hard to hand traps. See, in this metagame you have a ton of hand traps like Ash, Gamma, Nib, Imperm, and the list goes on. Whereas a strategy like this doesn't really lose to any single one of those. The best card is Ash, but then again, if you just resolve the Buster Blader trap, which might I add, it's really hard to stop that trap card because you can't even Ash it because it sends for cost, it just makes the deck that much more resilient. Secondarily, it's a trap deck, meaning you can play around things like Zexal. I mean, let's actually talk about that for a second. Screw Zexal, screw Guru, I hate that deck! Alright, enough of me venting, but realistically, there are a ton of reasons why being able to play on your opponent's turn is a lot better. This deck also has a lot more versatility in the form of trap cards. For example, you could play 2 Dino-Miscus and 2 Ice Dragon's Prison in order to have more powerful traps to set off Trap Trick, while also having an out to a card like Mystic Mind. I would argue that Buster Blader, being a trap deck, is more well-rounded than a lot of other decks in the current metagame, making this a much better threat overall. But then we have to keep in mind that yes, you get to play insane engines like the Dogmatica and Red Eyes engine. Let's keep in mind that Dragoon is still a hell of a card, even if it's not as good in a combo format. And Dogmatica is still an insane resource generating engine. While yes, punishment is not as great in this deck because one, you can't afford to be locked out of the extra nearly as much. Secondarily, the resources you gain off it aren't as potent because that's not nearly as important to your Wincon. I would still argue that this is a very good engine just because Nadir is such a good card and Ecclesia is such a resource generating powerhouse. Two things I do want to point out, however, is first off, this deck does run a lot of Garnets. I mean, you're playing cards like the Buster Bladers, which, I mean, they are insanely powerful, but you also have to play 2 of the Buster Blader monster and 2 of the Buster Blader trap in order to make this deck really go, and to make sure you don't brick on these cards. But even then, I feel like the benefit is worthwhile comparatively to the cost. You do also have to play the Dragoon cards, which inherently are bricky because you're playing 2 normal monsters. But at the very minimum, Red Eyes Fusion is a starter in this deck and not a Garnet. But additionally, you have to keep in mind you also have to run Red Eyes Wyvern, and for the Red Eyes Insight to search the Red Eyes Fusion, which is good and bad because if you get access to your Red Eyes engine, then drawing Wyvern isn't nearly as much of a concern. Also, Dragoon inherently is actually pretty good because it makes your bricks not nearly as bad because you just discard the bricks, but even then, you know, it's still really rough drawing these types of cards. It's interesting to point out as well that Master Rule 5 being released actually made this deck viable, and I think it's really cool seeing that. Master Rule 5, or like Master Rule 2020 revision if you're one of those types of people, is definitely a good thing for the game overall, and it lets us explore different kinds of play styles that we wouldn't have been able to achieve in Master Rule 4, and enables more creativity overall. And I would argue that creativity is the name of the game in Yu-Gi-Oh! Not that like you need it to be competitively viable and everything, blah blah blah. Anyways, the point being that I think creativity is a really core aspect of what makes Yu-Gi-Oh! So great, at least for me, and that's why I think this Buster Blader innovation is, I mean, very creative and very awesome. I mean, even though, like, yes, you don't want to get skill drained, I think at the same time it's a lot more quote-unquote fair than what the combo decks are doing right now, and in turn I would argue this is actually a good trap deck. And actually, I can't believe I'm saying this, I played this deck at a Yu-Gi-Tuber Grand Championship as a joke, but Buster Blader is actually good right now. Thank you all so much for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and with that, I hope to see you soon.